Hi everyone, my name is Steph and I am a graduate aerospace engineer at a company called BAE Systems Australia. Aerospace engineers design repairs and new parts for aircraft and spacecraft, as well as organising any testing required. I'm currently working on finding new parts to install on fast jet planes. Now there are 4 forces that are always acting on objects when they are flying through the air, so let's talk more about aircraft flying. These 4 forces are weight, lift, thrust, and drag. These need to be carefully balanced when an aircraft is moving through the air because the amount of each force needed depends on whether the aircraft is taking off from the ground, cruising through the air, accelerating, so speeding up, decelerating, slowing down, or coming into land back on the ground. So what is a force? A force is something you can't see that causes an object to move, like when you push a door open using the force of your hand. Force is measured in newtons. Of these 4 forces acting on an aircraft in flight, weight is the easiest to understand because we experience it all around us every day. If you jump up in the air, you'll quickly come back down to the ground. So why can't we just jump up and into space? Because there's something that's always pulling us back down. Otherwise, we'd all be floating around in the air. Now, this something that acts towards the centre of the earth is called gravity. Gravity allows everything we see to stay on Earth, like water, animals, plants, houses, and cars. Without gravity, everything would just fly off into space. The interesting thing about gravity is that it's different on every single planet. So if you go to the moon, there's less gravity because the moon is smaller than Earth, so its gravitational force is weaker. This means that you'd be able to jump higher on the moon than you can on Earth. Gravity allows people and things to have weight. Weight is a force and is simply gravity acting on the mass of something. For example, the weight of a chicken is less than the weight of a cow because the chicken is smaller. It has less mass. So even aircraft in the air still feel gravity, even though they're not on the ground while flying, and therefore each aircraft has a particular weight. A man called Sir Isaac Newton discovered this, along with other interesting explanations that we now call Newton's laws of motion. And as I mentioned earlier, the unit we use to measure force is called newtons, named after this man. Sir Isaac Newton was the first person to seriously study gravity over 300 years ago. He wondered why apples fell to the ground when they were ripe. So he asked himself, what is it that causes these apples to fall to the ground? He realised that there must be a force pulling everything to Earth because whenever you throw something up, it comes down, even feathers. And when you throw something upwards and forwards, like when you're scoring a goal in basketball, the ball still comes down again, but having travelled some distance too. The same thing happens with aircraft, although when designing an aircraft, engineers carefully work out exactly what these forces are and design the aircraft accordingly. So when your team is designing their aircraft in this competition, you need to keep weight in mind, remembering that weight acts at the centre of objects. So the aircraft's distribution of mass must be carefully balanced from nose to tail and from wingtip to wingtip. The lighter the materials you use, the less weight there will be pulling it to the ground, and the easier it will be to get it up in the air. In saying this, if your aircraft is too light, it may fly uncontrollably as it would not have enough weight acting to control it. You can always weigh your aircraft using scales to see what its mass is, and therefore what force is pulling it to the ground because of gravity. So here's a little hint, just add a 0 to this value to get its weight. Now, if only weight was acting on an aircraft, it'd never get up in the air. So the force acting away from the ground is called lift, which can be clearly seen by aircraft taking off from the runway. So how do aircraft generate lift? Aircraft's wings are actually the part that generates the lift. So if you slice a wing in half, like what's being shown in this diagram, you'll see the wing has a special shape called an airfoil, where the top of the wing is more curved than the bottom of the wing. So when an aircraft is flying through the air, the air that flows over the wing has to travel a greater distance than the air that flows below it in order for it all to meet up at the back of the wing again. But because the air flowing over the wing has to travel further in the same amount of time, it has to spread out more, meaning that it becomes less dense. So this top air experiences a decrease in what we call pressure. This is the basic idea behind another discovery called Bernoulli's principle, and simply means that the air flowing over the wing is now unbalanced compared to the air below. So the air below is able to push upwards more, lifting the wing. It will be difficult to make an airfoil shape on the wings of a paper airplane, but in this case, you can create some lift using your arm. So by throwing your paper plane upwards slightly as you launch it. The more you point your throw upwards, the more lift will be created in your plane's flight path, but be careful not to aim too high. So along with launching the plane up slightly, you're mainly launching it forwards. This forward action of your arm generates thrust in the paper plane. Now, thrust is the force that propels an aircraft through the air in flight and is produced by the propulsion system, so in other words, the engines. Some engines have propellers attached to them, while other engines are jet engines. Jet engines work to suck air in, then push it out faster, forcing the aircraft forwards. This idea can be shown by letting air out of a balloon. So the air exiting is moving faster than the air around it, and the balloon gets pushed through the air. Also, the more thrust there is acting on an aircraft, the quicker the air will go across the wings when it's flying, and the more lift there is being produced. Meanwhile, the force opposite to thrust is called drag. Drag is a force that resists airflow and is mainly caused by surfaces of the aircraft hitting the oncoming air. So drag is also increased by air flowing over rough or bumpy surfaces. This is because the air gets trapped in the surface's dips, slowing down overall airflow. So you want your plane to be what we call streamlined, having smooth and mostly horizontal or flat surfaces in order to reduce drag. We also need drag to be less than thrust when an aircraft is taking off and accelerating, so when it's going faster and faster in the air. However, when the aircraft is coming into land, it needs to slow down. So we need the engines to make less thrust so that there is less thrust than drag force acting on the aircraft. To summarize, in order for an aircraft to start flying upwards, you need more lift than weight. And in order for the aircraft to accelerate or move forwards, you need more thrust than drag. Test flying your paper plane is the best way to see if these four forces are balancing well. So if your aircraft flies in the direction that you launch it in, it doesn't spin too much, and it's able to travel a good distance, then these four forces are well balanced. These four forces act on everything that flies. This includes helicopters, rockets, birds, and even people parachuting. Knowing what you've just learnt, you could be well on your way to working in the aviation and aerospace industry with fantastic jobs, such as being an aerospace engineer, like I am, so designing new parts of the aircraft, or being a pilot and flying the aircraft, or becoming an aircraft technician, who is someone that makes sure the aircraft parts are working properly, which is very important. You could even decide to become a rocket scientist. So designing and testing spacecraft and satellites that fly into space. Alternatively, you could become an air traffic controller. So someone who organises how planes fly around each other in the sky safely, or an air rescuer, someone who flies around in helicopters and takes people safely to hospitals. I suggest learning as much as you can in your school subjects, particularly in science, design or drawing, and maths, as well as asking your parents and teachers to help you perform some really cool experiments. The aviation and aerospace industry provides opportunities for people all over the world. No other career can take you higher.